10 years of citizen science data collection of wetland plants in an urban protected area, wild bird feeding in an urban area, intensity, economics and numbers of individuals supported, integrating citizen science into protected areas, problems and prospects from East Africa, mapping species distributions, a comparison of skilled naturalist and lay citizen science recording. What does the public know about Ebola? The public's risk perceptions regarding the current Ebola outbreak in an as yet unaffected country. Investigating long-term changes in the spring migration of monarch butterflies, Lepidoptera, nymphalidae, using 18 years of data from Journey North, a citizen science program. Habitat productivity and temporal patterns of monarch butterfly egg densities in the eastern United States. Immature monarch survival, effects of site characteristics, density, and time. Exploring synergies, hopeful tourism and citizen science. Mapping non-native invasive species and accessibility in an urban forest, a case study of participatory mapping and citizen science in Atlanta, Georgia. Fat Stellar Cluster Survey, II. Andromeda Project Cluster Catalog. The Milky Way Project, What are yellow balls? Citizen science, a new direction in canine behavior research. The benefits from and barriers to participation in civic environmental organizations in South Africa, using a citizen science program to monitor coral reef biodiversity through space and time, using citizen science data for conservation planning, methods for quality control and downscaling for using stochastic patch occupancy modeling. Citizen science and field survey observations provide comparable results for mapping Vancouver Island white-tailed ptarmigan, Lagopus leucurus distributions. Global change and local solutions, tapping the unrealized potential of citizen science for biodiversity research. A novel citizen science approach for large-scale standardized monitoring of bat activity and distribution, evaluated in eastern England. Ongoing changes in the avifauna of La Selva Biological Station, Costa Rica, 23 years of Christmas bird counts. Linking place-based citizen science with large-scale conservation research, a case study of bird-building collisions and the role of professional scientists. Using EDNA to develop a national citizen science-based monitoring program for the great crested newt, Trichuris cristatus. Citizen science reveals trends in bat populations, the National Bat Monitoring Program in Great Britain. Contrasting impacts of pesticides on butterflies and bumblebees in private gardens in France. Citizen science contributes to our knowledge of invasive plant species distributions. The Biological Records Center, a pioneer of citizen science. Emerging technologies for biological recording, ecological monitoring with citizen science, the design and implementation of schemes for recording plants in Britain and Ireland, unbiased inference of plant flowering phenology from biological recording data, air pollution and its effects on lichens, bryophytes, and lichen feeding Lepidoptera, review and evidence from biological records. The contribution of volunteer recorders to our understanding of biological invasions. Adult activity and temperature preference drives region-wide damselfly, Zygoptera, distributions under a warming climate. Accelerating the digitization of biodiversity research specimens through online public participation. A citizen army for science, quantifying the contributions of citizen scientists to our understanding of monarch butterfly biology. Citizen science is a distinct field of inquiry. It's good to share why environmental scientists' ethics are out of date. Migratory songbirds in the East Asian Australasian flyway, a review from a conservation perspective. Scientific and heritage crowdsourcing at the crossroads of models of coordination and cooperation, the case of digital herbaria, child sexual abuse in the Roman Catholic Church in Germany, comparison of victim impact data collected through church-sponsored and government-sponsored programs, shifting time, recent changes to the phenology of Australian species, citizen science introduction, citizen-based litter and marine debris data collection and mapping, defining and measuring success in online citizen science, a case study of Zooniverse projects. Visualization of citizen science volunteers' behaviors with data from usage logs. Shifting Elasmo branch community assemblage at Cocos Iceland in isolated marine protected area. Influence of volunteer and project characteristics on data quality of biological surveys. The role of citizens in detecting and responding to a rapid marine invasion. Exploring the entry points for citizen science in urban sustainability initiatives. Evaluating protected area effectiveness using bird lists in the Australian wet tropics. Citizen science and wildlife disease surveillance. Abundance models improve spatial and temporal prioritization of conservation resources. Documenting stewardship responsibilities across the annual cycle for birds on U.S. public lands. Using citizen science to monitor pollination services. 10 years of invasion, Harmonia axiridis, Pallas, Coleoptera, Coccinellity, in Britain, digital repository of associations between environmental variables, a new resource to facilitate knowledge synthesis, use of remote sensing to produce a habitat map of Norfolk, differential effects of climate and species interactions on range limits at a hybrid zone, potential direct and indirect impacts of climate change, single nucleotide polymorphism-based dispersal estimates using non-invasive sampling, individual and community level impacts of volunteer environmental monitoring, a synthesis of peer-reviewed literature, the next generation of action ecology, novel approaches towards global ecological research, species-specific phenological responses to winter temperature and precipitation in a water-limited ecosystem. Citizen science data provides new insight into annual and seasonal variation in migration patterns. Citizen science is an approach for overcoming insufficient monitoring and inadequate stakeholder buy-in in adaptive management, criteria and evidence. Lessons from Fraxinus, a crowdsourced citizen science game in genomics. An overview of the tarpon genetic recapture study in Florida, a citizen science success story. Exploring participation in ecological monitoring in Nepal's community forests. Understanding human coyote encounters in urban ecosystems using citizen science data. What do socioeconomics tell us? Quantification of phytoplankton bloom dynamics by citizen scientists in urban and peri-urban environments. Sampling of riverine litter with citizen scientists. Findings and recommendations. Passive samplers and community science in regional air quality measurement. Education and communication. A framework for addressing ethical issues in citizen science. Citizen science for policy development. The case of koala management in South Australia. West Virginia University AF student Sabunit leads a citizen science program. Climate change adaptation and restoration of western trout streams. Opportunities and strategies. Using cultural ecosystem services to inform restoration priorities in the Laurentian Great Lakes. Citizen science helps predict risk of emerging infectious disease. Can citizen science assist digital soil mapping? Contrasting visions of science in ecological restoration. Expert lay dynamics between professional practitioners and volunteers. The National Landslide Database of Great Britain, acquisition, communication and the role of social media, mapping or oral activity with Twitter. Is supplementary feeding in gardens a driver of evolutionary change in a migratory bird species? Climate change in our backyards, the reshuffling of North America's winter bird communities. Rapid assessment of an ocean warming hotspot reveals high confidence in potential species range extensions. Social media, public participation, and the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill. Participant-driven matchmaking in the genomic era, the main belt comets, the Pan-STARRS 1 perspective. The face of conservation responding to a dynamically changing world. Theory's role in shaping behavioral health research for population health. Assessing accuracy in citizen science-based plant phenology monitoring. Data democracy, increased supply of geospatial information and expanded participatory processes in the production of data. Classifying natural waters with the 4 oil color index system. Results, applications, correlations and crowdsourcing. Constructing and constraining participation in participatory arts and HCI. Alternative preservatives of insect DNA for citizen science and other low-cost applications. Challenges for biodiversity monitoring using citizen science in transitioning social ecological systems. Comparing monitoring data collected by volunteers and professionals shows that citizen scientists can detect long-term change on coral reefs. Are wildlife recreationists conservationists? Linking hunting, birdwatching, and pro-environmental behavior. Identifying effective actions to guide volunteer-based and nationwide conservation efforts for a ground-nesting farmland bird. Landscape and climate determine patterns of spread for all color morphs of the alien ladybird Harmonia axyridis. Simple and efficient trap for bark and ambrosia beetles, Coleoptera, Curculionidae, to facilitate invasive species monitoring and citizen involvement. Abundance and environmental drivers of anthropogenic litter on 5 Lake Michigan beaches, a study facilitated by citizen science data collection. Natural history and systematic position of Rettus belphegor, Encombe, Lepidoptera, Rhyodinidae, an endangered butterfly with narrow distribution in southeast Brazil. Climate association with fluctuation in annual abundance of 50 widely distributed moths in England and Wales, a citizen science study. Comparison of trends in butterfly populations between monitoring schemes. Cats are rare where coyotes roam. Time is an affliction, why ecology cannot be as predictive as physics and why it needs time series. Jackal narratives, predator control and contested ecologies in the Karoo, South Africa. Constructing scientific communities, citizen science in the 19th and 21st centuries. Modeling biodiversity distribution in agricultural landscapes to support ecological network planning. Citizen science in action, evidence for long-term, region-wide house sparrow declines in Flanders, Belgium. Patterns and causes of covariation in bird and butterfly community structure. How to integrate remotely sensed data in biodiversity for ecosystem assessments at landscape scale. Collaborative approaches to accessing and utilizing historical citizen science data. A case study with spearfishers from Eastern Australia. Can citizen science contribute to the evidence base that underpins marine policy? Citizen science and the power of public participation in marine spatial planning. POPs monitoring in Australia and New Zealand using plastic resin pellets, and International Pellet Watch as a tool for education and raising public awareness on plastic debris and POPs. Recommendations on standardizing lists of marine alien species. Lessons from the Mediterranean Sea. Plastic in surface waters of the Inside Passage and beaches of the Salish Sea in Washington State. Sea Cleaner, focusing citizen science and environment education on unraveling the marine litter problem. Testing hypotheses on distribution shifts and changes in phenology of imperfectly detectable species. Gravitational lens modeling in a citizen science context. Citizen science is not enough on its own. Making marine and coastal citizen science matter. Approaches to passive mosquito surveillance in the EU. Surface drifter movement indicates onshore egg transport from a reef fish spawning aggregation. Correction, Citsiwomen, a new model for managing, documenting, and sharing citizen science data. Combining public health education and disease ecology research, using citizen science to assess Chagas disease entomological risk in Texas. Do healthy monarchs migrate farther? Tracking natal origins of parasitized versus uninfected monarch butterflies overwintering in Mexico. Participating in a citizen science monitoring program. Implications for environmental education. An analysis of citizen science-based research, usage and publication patterns. Citizen science program shows urban areas have lower occurrence of frog species, but not accelerated declines. Effects of climate change on habitat availability and configuration for an endemic coastal alpine bird. Developing a workflow to identify inconsistencies in volunteer geographic information, a phenological case study. Can observation skills of citizen scientists be estimated using species accumulation curves? Citizen science as a new tool in dog cognition research. The novel application of non-lethal citizen science tissue sampling in recreational fisheries. Participatory patterns in an international air quality monitoring initiative. Volunteer participation in citizen science projects. Comparing land surface phenology with leafing and flowering observations from the Plantwatch Citizen Network. Practice or theory, situating science teacher preparation within a context of ecojustice philosophy. Outcomes of a self-regulated learning curriculum model network analysis of middle school students' views of nature of science. Motivation to participate in an online citizen science game, a study of Foldit. Repainting citizen science. Hydrocrowd, a citizen science snapshot to assess the spatial control of nitrogen solutes in surface waters. Doing the Great British Class Survey. Aurorasaurus, a citizen science platform for viewing and reporting the aurora. Space weather and citizen science. Validation of a priori CME arrival predictions made using real-time heliospheric imager observations. How can we build an impactful future for science in conservation? Essential next steps. Hybrid zones, windows on climate change, evolution of the indoor biome, the Opal Buds Count Survey, exploring the effects of urbanization and habitat characteristics using citizen science, biodiversity in urban gardens, assessing the accuracy of citizen science data on garden hedgehogs, digital catchment observatories, a platform for engagement and knowledge exchange between catchment scientists, policy makers, and local communities. Estimating by Arnshi, Ovis canadensis, abundance using non-invasive sampling at a mineral lick within a national park wilderness area. Good neighbors, distribution of black-tufted marmoset, Calothrix penicillata, in an urban environment. Achieving positive social outcomes through participatory urban wildlife conservation projects. Monitoring landscape-level distribution and migration phenology of raptors using a volunteer camera trap network. Digital inclusion, the social implications of open science. Crowdsourcing the identification of organisms, a case study of icebird. Citizen science reveals widespread negative effects of roads on amphibian distributions. Organizing phenological data resources to inform natural resource conservation. Evaluating data quality collected by volunteers for first-level inspection of hydraulic structures in mountain catchments. Statistical solutions for error and bias in global citizen science datasets. Can citizen science survey non-indigenous fish species in the eastern Mediterranean Sea, using citizen science to estimate lichen diversity? Statistical ecology comes of age. Environmental research translation, enhancing interactions with communities at contaminated sites. Modeling species distributional shifts across broad spatial extents by linking dynamic occupancy models with public-based surveys. The culture of environmental education, insights from a citizen science experiment in India. Demographic modeling of citizen science data informs habitat preferences and population dynamics of recovering fishes. Monitoring abundance and phenology in multivoltine butterfly species, a novel mixture model. Human visual identification of individual Andean bears Trimarctos ornatus. Computer vision, archaeological classification and China's terracotta warriors. Reliability of ephemeral mountain springs in Mojave National Preserve, California. Patterns of marine debris distribution on the beaches of Rottnest Island, Western Australia. The role of atmospheric conditions in the seasonal dynamics of North American migration flyways. Linking public participation in scientific research to the indicators and needs of international environmental agreements. Ecologists, educators, and writers collaborate with the public to assess backyard diversity in the School of Ants project, using opportunistic photo identifications to detect a population decline of killer whales, Orcinus orca, in British and Irish waters. Citizens' vigilance on environmental health through IT and genomics. An evaluation of a citizen science data collection program for recording wildlife observations along a highway. Controlling invasive species by empowering environmental stakeholders, ecotourism boat operators as potential guardians of wildlife against the invasive American mink. Crowdsourcing harnessing the masses to advance health and medicine, a systematic review. Starting small, using microbiology to foster scientific literacy. Loss of nesting sites is not a primary factor limiting northern chimney swift populations. Designing a sustainable monitoring framework for assessing impacts of climate change at Joshua Tree National Park, USA. Conservation interests of applying spatial distribution modeling to large vagile neotropical mammals. Tribute to Tinbergen, public engagement in ethology. Distribution models for koalas in South Australia using citizen science collected data. Next steps for citizen science. Non-invasive genetic sampling allows estimation of capercaillie numbers and population structure in the Bohemian forest. The invisible prevalence of citizen science in global research, migratory birds and climate change. Exploring the role of ospreys in education. Spatiotemporal monitoring of allergic rhinitis symptoms in the Netherlands using citizen science. Touching the grass, science, uncertainty and everyday life from Chernobyl to Fukushima. The ins and outs of developing a field-based science project, learning by lassoing lizards. How deer are DARE volunteers, the efficiency of monitoring DARE using teams of volunteers to conduct pellet group counts. Using citizen-reported data to predict distributions of 2 non-native insect species in Sweden. Using citizen science to investigate the role of productivity in house sparrow passer domesticus population trends. Quantifying range-wide variation in population trends from local abundance surveys and widespread opportunistic occurrence records. A resampling-based method for effort correction in abundance trend analyses from opportunistic biological records. The game of curiosity, using video games to cultivate future scientists. Evaluating range expansion models for calculating non-native species expansion rate. Observe climate-induced changes in plant phenology in the Netherlands. Classification of large acoustic datasets using machine learning and crowdsourcing. Application to whale calls. Nidaria in UK coastal waters. Description of spatio-temporal patterns and interannual variability. Secretarybird Sagittarius serpentarius population trends and ecology. Insights from South African citizen science data. Assessment of quality for middle level and high school student generated water quality data. Spatial prediction of blood lead levels in children in Toledo, OH using fuzzy sets and the site-specific IEUBK model. Locating species range frontiers. A cost and efficiency comparison of citizen science and hair tube survey methods for use in tracking an invasive squirrel. Distribution patterns of migrating humpback whales, Megotera nobiangli, in Jervis Bay, Australia. A spatial analysis using geographical citizen science data. Innovation in communications about marine protection. Long-term citizen collected data reveal geographical patterns and temporal trends in lake water clarity. Planet Hunters, VI, an independent characterization of KOI 351 and several long-period planet candidates from the Kepler archival data. Acoustic telemetry validates a citizen science approach for monitoring sharks on coral reefs. Recovery of near-Earth asteroids by a citizen science project of the Spanish Virtual Observatory. The Milky Way project, leveraging citizen science and machine learning to detect interstellar bubbles. Mapping atmospheric aerosols with the citizen science network of smartphone spectropolarimeters. Phenological advancement of lecinid butterflies in Massachusetts. R. avis, an R package for downloading information stored in Proyecto Avis, a citizen science bird project. Garden and landscape scale correlates of moths of differing conservation status. Significant effects of urbanization and habitat diversity. Observer aging and long-term avian survey data quality. Resurrecting Helix straminia, a forgotten escargot with trans-Adriatic distribution. First insights into the genetic variation within the genus Helix, Gastropoda, pulmonata. Where are the wild things? Why we need better data on species distribution. Crowd Science, the organization of scientific research in open collaborative projects. Network environmentalism, citizen scientists as agents for environmental advocacy. Interactive plant identification based on social image data. European do-it-yourself, DIY, biology, beyond the hope, hype and horror. Low-cost, audio, recording, LCR, for advancing soundscape ecology towards the conservation of sonic complexity and biodiversity in natural and urban landscapes. 15 years of annual Cape Parrot Poicephalus robustus censuses, current population trends and conservation contributions. Ghost fishing activity in derelict blue crab traps in Louisiana, unlocking the potential of Google Earth as a tool in invasion science. Pervasive analytics and citizen science, taking participatory citizen science to extremes. Hacker science versus closed science, building environmental monitoring infrastructure. A linguistic decision-making approach to assess the quality of volunteer geographic information for citizen science. Evaluation on crowdsourcing research, current status and future direction. The IQ of the crowd, understanding and improving information quality in structured user-generated content. Adonata origins, biogeography, and diversification in an eastern North American hotspot. Multiple pathways to high temperate forest insect diversity. Determinants of successful arthropod eradication programs. Estimating the cost of different strategies for measuring farmland biodiversity. Evidence from a Europe-wide field evaluation. Substitutable habitats. The biophysical and anthropogenic drivers of an exotic bird's distribution. Lights, camera. Citizen science, assessing the effectiveness of smartphone-based video training in invasive plant identification. Citizen science, best practices to remove observer bias in trend analysis. The role of citizen science in monitoring biodiversity in Ireland. The how and why of societal publications for citizen science projects and scientists. Seed and feeder used by birds in the United States and Canada. Factors influencing seed species selection by wild birds at feeders. Experimental evidence for a mismatch between insect emergence and waterfowl hatching under increased spring temperatures. Unexpected phenological responses of butterflies to the interaction of urbanization and geographic temperature. A conceptual approach to a citizens' observatory, supporting community-based environmental governance. Recreation shapes a landscape of fear for a threatened forest bird species in Central Europe, using occupancy analysis to validate the use of footprint tunnels as a method for monitoring the hedgehog Erinaceus europaeus. Integrating information from geolocators, weather radar, and citizen science to uncover a key stopover area of an aerial insectivore. Fish population fluctuation estimates based on 15 years of reef volunteer diver data for the Monterey Peninsula, California. Occupancy modeling as a new approach to assess supranational trends using opportunistic data. A pilot study for the damselfly Calopteryx splendens. Estimating fish populations from reef citizen science volunteer diver order of magnitude surveys. Field of Dreams or Dream Team, assessing 2 models for drought impact reporting in the semi-arid southwest, realizing the full potential of citizen science monitoring programs. Climate effects on the flight period of lecinid butterflies in Massachusetts. Biodiversity technologies, tools as change agents. A comparison of bird feeding practices in the United States and Canada. Are small greening areas enhancing bird diversity? Insights from community-driven greening projects in Boston. Effects of the emerald ash borer invasion on 4 species of birds. Invasive plants in wildlife refuges. Coordinated research with undergraduate ecology courses. Next generation field guides. Integrating multiple data sources to assess the distribution and abundance of bottlenose dolphins Tursiops truncatus in Scottish waters. Public deliberation and the geographies of wind justice. Distribution and abundance of small plastic debris on beaches in the SE Pacific. CHILLO, a study supported by a citizen science project. The main vernal pool soil mapping and assessment program, engaging municipal officials and private landowners in community-based citizen science. A greenhouse and field-based study to determine the accumulation of arsenic in common homegrown vegetables grown in mining-affected soils. Assessing the value of the garden moth scheme citizen science dataset. How does light trap type affect catch? Promoting ecoliteracy through research service learning and citizen science. Crowd-funded microgrants for genomics and big data. An actionable idea connecting small, artisan, science, infrastructure science, and citizen philanthropy. Participatory noise mapping works. An evaluation of participatory sensing as an alternative to standard techniques for environmental monitoring. Identification of self-reported user behavior, education level, and preferences to reduce littering on beaches. A survey from the SE Pacific. OpenPhilo, a customizable crowd computing platform for multiple sequence alignment. Phenological changes in the southern hemisphere. Determining occurrence dynamics when false positives occur, estimating the range dynamics of wolves from public survey data. Can citizen science lead to positive conservation attitudes and behaviors? Citizen science reveals an extensive shift in the winter distribution of migratory western grebes. Life history traits and landscape characteristics predict macro moth responses to forest fragmentation. Process, not product. Investigating recommendations for improving citizen science success. Humans as long-distance dispersers of rural plant communities, using citizen scientists to measure an ecosystem service nationwide. Weekend bias in citizen science data reporting, implications for phenology studies, human trampling effects on Mediterranean coastal dune plants, climate-driven changes in northeastern U.S. butterfly communities, modeling relationships between lichen bioindicators, air quality and climate on a national scale, results from the UK Opal Air Survey. How reliable are citizen-derived scientific data? Assessing the quality of contrail observations made by the general public. Quantifying the sampling error in tree census measurements by volunteers and its effect on carbon stock estimates. Multi-generational long-distance migration of insects, studying the painted lady butterfly in the western Palearctic. Monitoring the ecosystem service provided by dung beetles offers benefits over commonly used biodiversity metrics and a traditional trapping method. Can citizen science produce good science? Testing the Opal Air Survey methodology, using lichens as indicators of nitrogenous pollution, to boldly go where no volunteer has gone before. Predicting volunteer activity to prioritize surveys at the landscape scale. Applying occupancy estimation and modeling to the analysis of atlas data. Can evolutionary design of social networks make it easier to be green? Inferring local processes from macro-scale phenological pattern, a comparison of two methods. Use of large-scale acoustic monitoring to assess anthropogenic pressures on Orthoptera communities. Geo-exposures, documenting temporary geological exposures in Great Britain through a citizen science website. Galaxy Z2, detailed morphological classifications for 122 galaxies from the Sloan Digital Sky Survey. The emergent discipline of health web science. Changes in participants' scientific attitudes and epistemological beliefs during an astronomical citizen science project. Assessing the quality and trustworthiness of citizen science data. Indexing butterfly abundance whilst accounting for missing counts and variability in seasonal pattern. The impacts of an invasive species citizen science training program on participant attitudes, behavior, and science literacy. Citizen science takes root building on a long tradition. Amateur naturalists are gathering data for understanding both seasonal events and the effects of climate change. The use of visual media as a tool for investigating animal behavior. It counts who counts. An experimental evaluation of the importance of observer effects on spotlight count estimates. Citizen science provides valuable data for monitoring global night sky luminance. Statistical analysis of manual segmentations of structures in medical images. Evaluating river otter demography using non-invasive genetic methods. The status of coccinella and S. impunctata, L. Coleoptera, coccinellidae, in North America, an updated distribution from citizen science data. Planet hunters, new Kepler planet candidates from analysis of Q2. Smartphones in ecology and evolution, a guide for the apprehensive. Planet hunters, VA confirmed Jupiter-sized planet in the habitable zone and 42 planet candidates from the Kepler archive data. Planet hunters, a transiting circumbinary planet in a quadruple star system. When peer-reviewed publications are not enough. Delivering science for natural resource management, reprinted from Forest Policy and Economics, Vol 21, PG1, 21st Century Scene Citizen Science and Science 2.0, a behavioral ecology approach to understand volunteer surveying for citizen science datasets. Climatic change is advancing the phenology of moth species in Ireland. Movements, reproductive seasonality, and fisheries interactions in the white-tip reef shark, Trienodon abesis, from community-contributed photographs. Can volunteers collect data that are comparable to professional scientists? A study of variables used in monitoring the outcomes of ecosystem rehabilitation. Natural history traits associated with detecting mortality within residential bird communities. Can citizen science provide insights? Evaluating the performance of volunteers in mapping invasive plants in public conservation lands. Comparing volunteer and professionally collected monitoring data from the rocky subtidal reefs of Southern California, USA. Co-producing conservation and knowledge, citizen-based sea turtle monitoring in North Carolina, USA. Public participation in soil surveys, lessons from a pilot study in England. Participatory science and education, bringing both views into focus. Insects and plants, engaging undergraduates in authentic research through citizen science. Citizen Science on a Local Scale, the Plants of Concern Program. International Citizen Science, Making the Local Global. Coral Watch, Education, Monitoring, and Sustainability through Citizen Science. National Geographic Field Scope, a platform for community geography. Lessons from Lady Beetles, accuracy of monitoring data from US and UK citizen science programs. Citizen science comes of age. The current state of citizen science as a tool for ecological research and public engagement. The future of citizen science, emerging technologies and shifting paradigms. Data validation in citizen science, a case study from Project Feeder Watch. Ecology and impacts of the invasive species, Lantana camera, in a social ecological system in South India, perspectives from local knowledge. Can citizen science monitor whale shark aggregations? Investigating bias in mark recapture modeling using identification photographs sourced from the public. A jungle in there, bacteria in belly buttons are highly diverse, but predictable. When giants turn up, sighting trends, environmental influences and habitat use of the manta ray Manta alfredi at a coral reef. When is a species declining? Optimizing survey effort to detect population changes in reptiles. Philo, a citizen science approach for improving multiple sequence alignment. Motivations and barriers in relation to community participation in biodiversity recording. The notes from Nature tool for unlocking biodiversity records from museum records through citizen science. The biodiversity audit approach challenges regional priorities and identifies a mismatch in conservation. Educating citizens about their coastal environments. Beach profiling in the Coastwatch project. Data-intensive science applied to broad-scale citizen science. Using citizen science to monitor bombus populations in the UK. Nesting ecology and relative abundance in the urban environment. Mobile, social, and wearable computing and the evolution of psychological practice. Citizen science in the age of neogeography, utilizing volunteered geographic information for environmental monitoring, supporting content curation communities, the case of the Encyclopedia of Life. Trust in citizen science research, a case study of the groundwater education through water evaluation and testing program. The Milky Way project, a statistical study of massive star formation associated with inferred bubbles. Planet hunters, assessing the Kepler inventory of short-period planets. Observer effects and avian call count survey quality, rare species biases and overconfidence. Wild data, collaborative e-research and university libraries. Overlapping landscapes, a persistent, but misdirected concern when collecting and analyzing ecological data. A comparison between professionally, Florida Department of Environmental Protection, and volunteer, Florida LaQH, collected trophic state chemistry data in Florida. Evaluating population estimates of mountain goats based on citizen science. Open Science, a new trust technology. A comparative analysis of butterfly richness detection capacity of polar transects and general microhabitat surveys. Plastic consumption and diet of glaucous winged gulls, Larus glossicans. Evolution Mega Lab, a case study in citizen science methods. The Milky Way project first data release, a bubblier galactic disk. Invasive species, to eat or not to eat, that is the question. Inadvertent consequences of community-based efforts to control invasive species. Planet hunters, the first 2 planet candidates identified by the public using the Kepler Public Archive data. Open educational resources in support of science learning, tools for inquiry and observation. The distribution of interplanetary dust between 0.96 and 1.04 AU is inferred from impacts on the stereo spacecraft observed by the heliospheric imagers. Invasive alien predator causes rapid declines of native European ladybirds. A simple, safe, and effective sampling technique for investigating earthworm communities in woodland soils. Implications for citizen science. Experimental investigation of false positive errors in auditory species occurrence surveys. Expert variability provides perspective on the strengths and weaknesses of citizen-driven intertidal monitoring program, accounting for detectability when estimating avian abundance in an urban area, measuring occupancy for an iconic bird species in urban parks. Validation of a citizen science-based model of site occupancy for eastern screech owls with systematic data in suburban New York and Connecticut. Observations of everyday biodiversity, a new perspective for conservation. Public participation in scientific research, a framework for deliberate design. The role of big society in monitoring the state of the natural environment. The value, limitations, and challenges of employing local experts in conservation research. Citizen science reveals unexpected continental-scale evolutionary change in a model organism. Invasive Plant Atlas of New England, the role of citizens in the science of invasive alien species detection. A simple numerical index for assessing the spring migration of monarch butterflies using data from Journey North, a citizen science program. The phenology of plant invasions, a community ecology perspective. Spatial and temporal trends in yellow stingray abundance, evidence from diver surveys. Discovery and significance of the colonial tunicate Didemnum vixillum in Alaska. Plant phenology networks of citizen scientists. Recommendations from 2 decades of experience in Canada. Easier citizen science is better. Seed exchanges, a key to analyze crop diversity dynamics in farmer-led on-farm conservation. Assessing citizen science data quality, an invasive species case study. Is science enough? Examining ways of understanding, coping with and adapting to storm risks in Johannesburg. The art and science of multi-scale citizen science support. Wet-dry mapping, using citizen scientists to monitor the extent of perennial surface flow in dryland regions. Using citizen science programs to identify host resistance in pest-invaded forests. The benefits and challenges of using real-time data in the classroom. Perspectives from the students, educators, and researchers. Outdoor webcams as geospatial sensor networks. Challenges, issues and opportunities. Volunteer monitoring of E. coli in streams of the upper Midwestern United States, a comparison of methods. Engaging the broader community in biodiversity research, the concept of the Comer pilot project for divers in Vibrant. Climatic constraints on wintering bird distributions are modified by urbanization and weather. Involvement of recreational scuba divers in emblematic species monitoring, the case of Mediterranean red coral, Corallium rubrum. A review of citizen science and community-based environmental monitoring, issues and opportunities. Biodiversity assessment, state-of-the-art techniques in phylogenomics and species identification. Galaxy Zoo supernovae star, monarch butterfly migration and parasite transmission in eastern North America. Public gardens, fulfilling the university's research mission. Using a free online citizen science project to teach observation and quantification of animal behavior. Realizing a synergy between research and education. How participation in ant monitoring helps raise biodiversity awareness in a resource-poor country. Predicting species distributions from checklist data using site occupancy models. Gender patterns in bird-related recreation in the USA and UK. Distorted views of biodiversity, spatial and temporal bias in species occurrence data. Environmental monitoring, the scale and speed of implementation varies according to the degree of people's involvement. Citizen science, recruiting residents for studies of tagged urban wildlife. Avian use of introduced plants, ornithologist records illuminate interspecific associations and research needs. EU social science, the role of internet social networks in the collection of bee biodiversity data. Volunteer health and emotional well-being in marine protected areas. Regional avian species declines estimated from volunteer-collected long-term data using list length analysis. Unite research with what citizens do for fun, recreational monitoring of marine biodiversity. User-friendly web mapping, lessons from a citizen science website. Lessons learned from a decade of sudden oak death in California, evaluating local management. Restarting the conversation, challenges at the interface between ecology and society. Buckets of resistance, standards and the effectiveness of citizen science. Improving and integrating data on invasive species collected by citizen scientists. Using citizen science to map human-coyote interaction in suburban New York, USA. Using spider web types as a substitute for assessing web-building spider biodiversity and the success of habitat restoration. Partnering with local communities to identify conservation priorities for endangered Grevy's zebra. The fall migration flyways of monarch butterflies in eastern North America revealed by citizen scientists. The Quake Catcher Network, citizen science expanding seismic horizons. Citizen science, a developing tool for expanding science knowledge and scientific literacy. Toxic ignorance and right to know in biomonitoring results communication, a survey of scientists and study participants. On the use of parataxonomy in biodiversity monitoring, a case study on wild flora. Effective sampling protocol and volunteer bias when sampling for macroinvertebrates. Marine invasive species, validation of citizen science and implications for national monitoring networks. A rare model limits the distribution of its more common mimic, a twist on frequency-dependent Batesian mimicry. Volunteer macroinvertebrate monitoring, tensions among group goals, data quality, and outcomes. Enhancing citizen contributions to biodiversity science and public policy. Parasitism of monarch butterflies, Danosplexipus, Bilispesia archipivora, Diptera, Tachinidae. Seasonal dynamics of mycoplasmal conjunctivitis in eastern North American house finches. Conservation and management applications of the Reef Volunteer Fish Monitoring Program. Chicago Wilderness, a new force in urban conservation. Thinking scientifically during participation in a citizen science project.